Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Crypto Dark Pod, presented by Blockchain Solidarity Media. We're a team of crypto sleuths ready to dive into these thick crypto weeds. We are not afraid to expose the darkness and deceptions that run rampant in crypto. From government and corporate tyranny to the scammy scammers and celebrity influencers, the Crypto Dark Pod team is more than ready to explore all the systematic and psychological tactics, the tricks and misdirection deployed on this new blockchain technology that makes prey of everyday people on the regular. We must be informed and vigilant. Together, we can learn to defend ourselves from these scamming hijackers, which is why we at the Crypto Dark Pod invite you to join us on our exploration into the dark sides of the blockchain. Go get your flashlight.
Okay, so the next topic we really want to talk about was, Bennett, this is where you come in, because you've really been all over these in a sort of really investigative way. Luna, as we know, you were really into that really early, found it out really early. You've also been across FTX. We've all seen your investigations and thoughts on that. But I want to ask you a specific question. What do you think are some of the key lessons? Like, what have we learned from these events? Have we learned anything at all? I mean, this stretches back, crashes and this, that, or the other, that stretch back in crypto's history as long as any of us can remember. What do you think we aren't learning from these scenarios, these incidents? And is it likely to happen again?
I think the interesting thing with both Luna and Terra and FTX in that regard is they're not particularly like new categories of failure. Luna and Terra was an algorithmic stablecoin system, specifically a seigniorage algorithmic stablecoin system. And we've seen attempts at those going back years. If you want to talk about new bits, or if you want to talk about Basis, or even specifically in the case of Terra, Basis Cash, right, which was run by Do Kwon, there was plenty of reason to believe that algorithmic stablecoins broadly, especially ones with this little collateral, were doomed to fail, right? And so, like, we didn't particularly get that much new information from Luna and Terra, except an indication as to how many people were not willing to accept that it was doomed to fail, how many people were vulnerable to the marketing of this kind of thing, and the confidence and style of Terraform Labs and someone like Do Kwon. And broadly, I think that same kind of thing applies to FTX. We knew there were conflicts of interest in terms of the operations of Alameda Research and FTX. People sending money to FTX often saw Alameda Research on their wire instructions. A lot of these types of things were already known, and we've seen previous exchange failures due to founders misappropriating the funds. I mean, we can go back to Quadriga CX, right? And where you had both Patrin and Cotton eventually misappropriating funds from the exchange, eventually leading to an insolvency, exchange failure, and then a protracted bankruptcy process that involved trying to recover these funds and make people as whole as possible. Both the example of FTX and the example of Luna and Terra are situations where their failure mode is one we have seen before. The things they were doing are things we have done before. The most interesting thing about them is how particularly large they were allowed to grow. And I think that in both of these cases, that points to some kind of like cultural weaknesses in terms of the members of cryptocurrency. The incredible number of individuals who were willing to believe that like Terra was a sustainable system, that the yield being paid in Anchor was sustainable, points to some kind of cultural orientation away from like a reasonable assessment of risk and towards this kind of degen behavior. And in FTX, it points to how someone taking on the trappings of legitimacy, paying lip service to compliance, and acting as though they are actively reaching out to regulators and politicians, convinces people they are actually doing those things, even when there is like evidence in front of them of serious conflicts that generally would not be accepted in other trading venues. And so I think that they serve as another chance for cryptocurrency to take some of these lessons to heart. That hopefully the scale of the failure in this case makes the next person who tries to start an algorithmic stablecoin have a lot more difficulty in convincing people that it is a sustainable thing they should put their money in. And hopefully the next time someone running an OTC desk and quantitative trading firm gets the genius idea to start an exchange they're going to be the primary market maker on, more people are like, I'm not sure I want to trade on that exchange, right? And so I think that both of those are not particularly unique in the history of cryptocurrency, but are important just because of how large they got and the scale of the fraud and malfeasance.
Paul, that's really interesting. Paul, you're obviously professor in crypto culture here. What's your thoughts on that? Are you optimistic that the scale of these two that we're talking about will mark some sort of turning point, or are we just waiting for the next even bigger one? What do you think?
I'm not optimistic at all. So at this point in my career, I would say crypto people don't learn lessons. That's something I've only started to really believe in the last, say, year or so. I think it's easy to imagine that crypto is something. There's this weird sense in which crypto feels like something that happened recently, or we're still early. One of the more common phrases. But let's say it's around 13 odd years old, depending on which way you want to see it, or 13, 14 years old. So, pretty soon we're going to be entering into 20 years of crypto. And that's, when you think about the internet and how we talk about the internet, we treat the internet as an established technology, a mature technology, has all its own problems, of course. But we still treat crypto as if it was invented in, say, 2021 or 2017, maybe, or something along those lines. So I'm not hugely optimistic. And even when I do get optimistic, I go to a conference and I'll be talking to somebody, and then they'll reveal, they're into something terrible, like some new meme coin that they're currently obsessed with. And I think there's also this deeper problem that goes all the way back to the beginning of crypto itself. So, the only reason centralized exchanges exist is arguably a failure of the technology itself. So the complexity of public key cryptography as a method of ownership is something that people in crypto have always rubbed against. They should embrace it, right? They should have your own private keys. They should be on a cold wallet, not your keys, not your coins, etc. But we've always seen, all the way back to the very, very beginning, 2010, 2011, when the first exchanges started to appear, that people immediately started treating the exchanges as their wallet. So essentially taking a more Web 2 interface as a surrogate for decentralized, money ownership. So I think it's a structural issue that goes all the way back to the beginning in many ways. And the dilemma that I'm thinking about now is we probably have there's two people in crypto now, the tourists, and the purists. That's how I try to think about this. So the tourists are people who are either just leaving their cryptocurrency on the exchange. They're maybe more interested in the latest NFT project. They're chasing meme coins, all that kind of activity. And then we have the purists, who believe that you should never use an exchange, or as Jameson Lopp says, you should get in now very quickly. You go into the exchange and then you immediately get out of there like it's some sort of terrible dive bar that you're not supposed to be in, or something along those lines. So I think that's a big part of the problem. It goes to the nature of the technology itself and whether people really want to be self-sovereign, etc. And then also, when somebody does try to attempt to introduce, let's say, something in between an exchange and pure cold wallet ownership, like Ledger, they get a lot of flack for it and actually have to reverse the process. So when they introduce this social recovery mechanism, which to my mind seems like a half decent solution to, okay, this will at least encourage people to get off the exchanges, which seem to have a pattern of collapse, Mt. Gox, Quadriga, FTX being the three famous examples, but that isn't seen as acceptable to the purists. So even when someone tries to provide a solution, they get pushed back on it. So I do think it's a very deep structural issue. These unresolved problems will keep coming up, and also, the misbehavior. I think the misbehavior maybe gets overstated a little bit because, let's say, like crypto is so scandalous at times. So when it has a scandal, the scandal is outsized. It's always over the top. It's a SBF, or it's Cotton, potentially faking his debt in India. This like Netflix documentary worthy type of topics. But there is if you dip your attention around other areas of fraud, all this kind of behavior goes on everywhere. It's just that in crypto, it's a little bit newer, and so it's a little bit more shocking. There's a good academic article which argues that one of the interesting things about crypto is there's a tendency to individualize the scandals. So we tend to focus on the individuals, and then we never really look at the deeper structural problems. So I think all of these we're not really going to learn the lessons unless we really take control of the solutions ourselves. So if we want to get people off exchanges, we have to have a social recovery or something along those lines.
Pudding, what do you make of all this, buddy? It's just depressing, isn't it? I mean, I have to agree with Paul. I'm not particularly optimistic either about this. But what are we doing, man? What's it?
I mean, this is something we've talked about multiple times. I mean, you have this narrative of like, well, when in the future, when it's better and the setup is better, but it's part of the game, I think, is this when it becomes or when it's there. But I mean, it's true what you're saying, that we've been here for 13, 14 years, and now we're going to be approaching 20 years, but they're loving this limbo, this sort of in-between place where I don't know, it thrives for scammers. So I wonder if there's a third piece of that puzzle: the purist, the tourist, and then the people that are benefiting in the middle from perpetuating hype and FOMO, and don't look too deep into this. Don't, like, just make your money, like, buy this NFT, change your life. All of these narratives that are like somewhere in the middle, those narratives are being perpetuated to the tourist. And like the purist is trying to be like, hey, be careful, but I don't know, maybe the tourist's ears just don't hear.
Yeah, it's what Kevin Iwaki calls it. The big dilemma we have is the regen versus degen funnel. So how do you funnel people into the positive stuff as opposed to the degenerative stuff? And until we solve that problem, we'll never really settle that debate.
I just have one question I wanted to pick, like this whole individualizing the crisis as well, rather than it being systemic. What role do you think, or how big a role do you think the sort of media plays? Because we all know that sort of media has it out for crypto, like it or not, I guess. But take the FTX scandal. How much did they emphasize that it was some SBF's sort of personal deficiencies, and or do you think they were more balanced than that? They took at it with crypto or more generally. What do you think is the balance there? What do you think the role media plays in sort of personalizing it, individualizing it on one sort of key guy in the crisis, or maybe it's other people that do that, and that's the problem? Bennett, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm a little conflicted, right? Because in the lead up to FTX collapse, Sam Bankman-Fried clearly was paying some PR firms to help him with this, but also had a good kind of intuition about what types of things were likely to make news and what phrases he would say that would get him beneficial coverage. And he took advantage of both of those things, like throughout his period, to get probably FTX a disproportionate amount of positive coverage based on like what they were actually doing. And so like that is a challenging thing to deal with when you're working in the media. And like there's a part in a Brady Dale, who writes for Axios. He recently released a book about SBF and the FTX bankruptcy. And at one point in it, he talks about how after covering cryptocurrency for, I think it was a year or so, he stopped writing about launches of new protocols, new tokens, new companies, because what these companies would say at launch was basically never what they actually ended up doing. And he got to the point where he basically wanted to wait until there was a there for him to report on. And so I think just because of like the tendency of cryptocurrency to really emphasize like the newness, the innovation, the things like that, there is a tendency for media to disproportionately pay attention to the things people are saying when things are being launched. After the collapse of FTX, I think that the coverage of Sam Bankman-Fried was always going to be a challenge, right? Especially because he was such an important political donor and had made himself like such an important political figure that any coverage of him tended to land, at least on Twitter, immediately into discussions of Sam Bankman-Fried's role politically, right? And like in specifically the case of FTX, like we can talk about broader systemic issues like that we don't have the regulator or political will to create systems that would meaningfully deal with problems like FTX before they collapse. But like looking specifically at FTX, it seems that much of the collapse was due to one man. Like throughout the different indictments and cases brought by like the SEC and CFTC, they repeatedly emphasized like how much of the stuff was done at the direction of Sam Bankman-Fried. And even in like the recent SEC and CFTC case against Binance and Changpeng Zhao, they make kind of that same point. This is the key man who is directing a lot of these things. And I think often in many of these cases, there is like an individual who is driving a lot of the bad behavior. There's often others who are complicit, but there's one who's like the motivating force who's trying to advance that.
Paul, last question on this. I think we'll move on to the next one. It's come up before on a recent episode of Blockchain Solidarity where we had a guy on who's in the lunar punk world, and he suggested that really, if the success of a coin, and Bitcoin is a perfect example of it, is when you have almost an iconic leader figure who no longer is a leader, Satoshi, right? So would you agree with the statement that so often leaders like SBF will lead a coin to just destruction or lead whatever to destruction, whereas if you have someone, an identity or an icon or whatever you want to say, like Satoshi, who's not there but not there, that can lead it in a good way, an SBF kind of figure in a bad way, or is that too black and white?
I think it's just impossible to replicate. It's a weird once-off scenario, really. So the Immaculate Conception, as the Bitcoiners tend to think about Bitcoin, this highly unusual situation where somebody who, this is the thing about Satoshi that most people can't replicate is the hiding of their tracks. So maybe you could argue something like, I'm going to launch a project and we're going to launch it in an anonymous way. And, we'll try to replicate the idea of Bitcoin's absent leader or leaderless structure. But, realistically, unless you're Satoshi level, let's say, like Satoshi level discipline, then that's very, very unlikely to happen. So I think it's the same in all walks of life. They're just a little bit of like Aristotle's virtue ethics. He just, there's some people who are like, decent character, some people who are, not so decent character. You just sort of have to hope you end up with one that's decent.
Fascinating. I love the word discipline as well, suggesting that he might still be out there, still covering up his tracks. Who knows? Yeah, very possible. Let's bounce on to the next one. I don't know if you guys, either of you, or even Pudding, your good self, were any of these crypto conferences. We again came up on another podcast. We were talking about it, and just really sort of how useful are they? Or are they mostly just talking shops? But more to the point, we wanted to talk about the state of Bitcoin and Ethereum conferences and their cultures around it. like I think over the last, say, few years, sort of this toxic Bitcoin culture has come to the fore. And it was really off-putting, to a lot of people who are pro-Bitcoin but don't want to associate with that end of it. And they seem to really take a knife to Ethereum, which, again, a lot of the folks who listen to this podcast, both of us we're open to both. So let's go to shoot to Paul on this one first. Have you been to any of these conferences recently? What was the sort of vibes that you got, the sort of culture coming out of them? Bitcoin and Ethereum, is there any part of them that are salvageable, that are positive, or is all the Bitcoin negative, Ethereum all positive, or is there bits of both in both worlds? What do you currently see?
I think up until quite recently, so I wouldn't have went to a Bitcoin. I wouldn't go to Bitcoin Miami. Wouldn't feel welcome. So I've written some stuff about Bitcoiners pretty publicly that would, it'd be kind of awkward for me to be at a Bitcoin conference until recently, because of that dominance of the maximalist Bitcoin only mindset. I tend to think about this as it's up until ordinals, more or less, Bitcoin was in something like a dark ages. So this is the dark ages of Bitcoin, where after the Bitcoin civil war, there is not a huge amount of technical innovation going on, and there's even a sense in which nobody wants to propose anything because everything went to hell when a major change to the Bitcoin protocol came up. So everybody was more focused on, okay, we'll allow the protocol to go into ossification. The one change that they did add, Taproot, actually inadvertently contributed to ordinals. But I think when everybody stopped talking about building anything new on Bitcoin, that became a little bit verboten. There was a little bit of an empty space there about what are you supposed to talk about now? Like, what's Bitcoin about if it's not about the technology? Early Bitcoin culture, more cypherpunk, more open source. So I was very much embedded in that community, very much in the Bitcoin talk early community, and considered myself a Bitcoiner. I have a Bitcoin tattoo even, which is one of those things.
That's awesome. We'll have to clip
Yeah.
moment. Where is it on your body?
It's on my hand. So that's how hardcore.
Oh, wow. So you can't even hide that one. Right, okay. Wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I have a lot of tattoos, so it doesn't stand out too much. But so I mean, so that tech thing, like that's what I was interested in. The digital libertarianism was okay, so I was happy enough to listen to the Austrian economics, but didn't believe it myself. But then after the Civil War, the vacuum got filled by culture. Like they're okay, we're going to talk about like what is Bitcoin culture. That's the new topic, and that's where you begin to see the rise of the Bitcoin influencer. I see these a little bit grifters often as well, like Jimmy Song, like the Swan Capital people. Max Kaiser is probably the worst offender for sure. And basically, these are people who advocate for a vision of Bitcoin politics. So they introduce politics into Bitcoin, and that politics, which shouldn't exist in my opinion, right? Bitcoin should be apolitical, but they basically shape Bitcoin as a populist American, Trumpist almost thing. You eat steak, you don't get vaccines, maybe you even are into QAnon or something. So in that article I wrote a while back, The Rise and Fall of Bitcoin, Maximalism, I called this character Uncle Bitcoin. So, he's just like your uncle who's into all these fringe topics, politics, but now also Bitcoin is added into the mix. So that's what I think happened there. So famously there's this thing about the post 2021 Bitcoiner. So this is somebody who arrives in 2021. At this point, we're really into the idea of the pure Bitcoin maximalism, Bitcoin only position. And for this person, Bitcoin is a lifestyle, right? So, anarchists sometimes talk about this thing of lifestyle anarchism. So it's more just like how you look, the cool parties you go to, showing off to other people that you're more principled than other people. I think that's something that I see in that post 2021 Bitcoin lifestyle generation. And probably the worst thing about it is because they arrived into the story only of Bitcoin. So to them, it's only about Bitcoin. So that's like their beginning point, and everything else is garbage. So that's what they're taught immediately. And so when they're that means like most of the information that they seem to get, I see as basically disinformation being fed down from the influencers. So the people who make their engagement of basically, trashing Ethereum or whatever, regardless of whether it's true, saying the conspiracy theories like Joseph Lubin controls the Ethereum Foundation, or just like kind of really silly stuff that doesn't really jive well with like real Ethereum. Now that's not to say Ethereum doesn't have problems. It just doesn't have those problems that they've invented for it. And then the next stage of it, which became very problematic, is the purism, so the purity test. So once you have a set of characteristics that you're supposed to live by, so another one might be, Bitcoiners are kind of like anti-woke now, that Robert Breedlove talking about like, posting memes about, anti-woke kind of stuff. And that's just like standard Bitcoin, laser-eyes, maximalist on Twitter behavior. But it gets so absurd that recently they've turned on Bitcoin Magazine. So Bitcoin Magazine is not seen as Bitcoin enough because they hosted Udi and Eric Wall at the Bitcoin Miami. Jameson Lopp, probably the ultimate Bitcoiner. He's like the Bitcoin personified. He's not good enough because he works for a company that does cold storage for ETH as well as Bitcoin. My theory here is that eventually they'll cancel Satoshi. They'll find something wrong with Satoshi and they'll retroactively cancel him as not being hardcore enough.
Oh wow!
So this, I think, it's all part of this dumbing down of Bitcoin, making Bitcoin unattractive. So you want to introduce people to I don't introduce people to Bitcoin anymore because I just feel like they might think that I'm trying to introduce them to some conspiratorial, populist, right wing ecosystem, like some sort of pipeline into those kind of things. And they might find me suspect or something. So I avoid it. And even in teaching it, it's very hard now because I don't bring my position to the students, but it does come up once they start looking into themselves. They get into Bitcoin, they like the message, then they go on Twitter and then they're like, what the hell is this?
Well,
what's here?
Let me interrupt you there, Paul, because that's fascinating, that last bit, what you said, because I mean, all of what you've been saying so far, and then has led me to sort of think about this question. And the last thing is worrying because we had the co-host of the Agenda podcast, Jonathan, on last week, and we were basically making the point that is this kind of political thing, everything that you've just described that's currently around Bitcoin, and we argued that came from mostly the US, as you kind of stated yourself, especially from the global north for sure, that it tarnishes Bitcoin, and actually it's a privileged outlook on Bitcoin because you're so focused on the politics around it, you don't take a look at what's happening elsewhere in the world where they're actually using it. So I guess you've outlined that it's almost a shame that people want to run away from Bitcoin because of these affiliations. If they disagree with it. But Bennett, let me, if you want to answer that, and then we'll bring Bennett in to see what he thinks about all this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just want to add there just that just to stress that I think it's changed in the last while. So in the last year or so, I would probably go to Bitcoin Miami next year because I feel the ordinals, BRC20, whether it turns out to be anything, it's introduced a more fun, welcoming part of the Bitcoin culture that you could join into. And then also on the fact that Bitcoin has this other life, the necessity life. I think there's good arguments from another subset of Bitcoiners, the resistance money people. Also, Alex Gladstein is good on this as well, where they essentially just make the point that ignore all the laser eyes people. And then just ask yourself the question, is it better to have something like Bitcoin in the world, a non-state money that can't be confiscated, or not? And then if you believe that, then you're a Bitcoiner. So you can see the beginnings of a counterculture to the dominant maximalism, I think.
Yeah, and it's a really nice, I think, was it Andrea M. Bailey I saw on Twitter earlier had said, is Bitcoin valuable because it's the sound money or something like this, or it'll accrue over time. And no, it's valuable, and it's valuable to mostly people in the global south right now. That's what gives us its main reason to like it or whatever. Pudding, do you have any questions to ask here before we throw it to Bennett and on what he thinks of this? And we haven't touched on Ethereum much here. We wanted to kind of find out, how do these? Is there something positive in the Bitcoin world that can interact with Ethereum? Is there anything negative we should bring out about Ethereum's culture that can't interact with Bitcoin? Sort of, Pudding, do you have any comments here? Maybe throw it to Bennett after that.
Well, I mean, I think Paul's touching on it, the ordinals and the fact that they sort of have to work alongside of Ethereum creates a new hope for combining community and not being so fixated on like Bitcoin, or Ethereum. Like, hey, like there's merging points, there's crossovers. We can work together. We have similar goals, which is different. I mean, this is back again to these like naive but valuable ideas that like, hey, the world could be made up different, and the way that money works could be different and could be more equitable for everyone. So I seek any play. I love that the ordinals came and that there's these natural crossovers, because I think we as humans, we want to make connections, and we want to find like alternative realities where we're not just picking fights with each other.
Yeah, it's really dystopic, like this extremism on either side. Bennett, how do you see it? What in the world that you're in? Sort of, do you see anything negative in the Ethereum world or in its relation to Bitcoin that needs dampened down as well? Because I think this friction on either side could lead to some. That's not ideal. It's a dystopia that we kind of want to avoid. As Pudding and Paul so eloquently put, we want both sides to just cooperate and work together and see a more pluralistic world. What way do you see it?
Yeah, so I think in terms of Bitcoin culture, my view echoes Paul's pretty significantly. I've made videos and stuff on Crypto Critics Corner about how I think that especially that type of kind of Bitcoin culture has actually ended up as a type of pipeline towards some of those like really radical political ideas and things like that. And I think like the tendency of Bitcoiners to fight themselves and invent purity tests is fundamentally bad for Bitcoin and makes it harder for them to reach whatever critical mass they need. I think Ethereum broadly has a better culture than Bitcoin in terms of like focusing on the things that matter for Ethereum and spending less time coming up with cultural signifiers that tell people you're with Ethereum. There are places where I think that's kind of fallen a little bit short. Like I think the ultrasound money meme that was going around was a little bit stupid. I think you're ceding certain economic grounds, and I think claiming, no, our protocol, our money is going to actually experience the paradox of thrift even worse than Bitcoin isn't a super compelling argument for your protocol. But I understand it in terms of like the mimetic battle, where if Bitcoin's going to say we're special because we're hard, then we're going to say we're special because look, we're even harder. So I understand it as a mimetic response, but I do think it kind of misses the point. And I think there are isolated pockets of the Ethereum community which have a tendency to almost become maximalistic in their belief that like Ethereum is the only one that's really going to exist or matter. And I think there's kind of ways you can make that argument, right? Like the fundamental part of Bitcoin maximalism, that Bitcoin is going to eventually consume all, is basically an argument from the network effect of Bitcoin, that the more people that are using Bitcoin, the more adopted it becomes, the more useful it becomes. And I think you can even make an argument that for something like Ethereum, which serves as kind of this platform in which you can build natively in the protocol these various interactions and transactions and types of structure that exists natively there. You could argue that the network effect might be even more pronounced for something like that because you're able to capture this larger share of the total value. And so I think it's possible to come up with kind of an argument to say that like Ethereum's going to be the winner that takes the majority of crypto interest and money, right? But fundamentally, when we're looking at these protocols, and what I sometimes feel like is forgotten is like you are making a certain set of trade-offs. Like we talked briefly in our last episode about how some meme coins market themselves as, look at how cheap our fees are, right? Dogecoin was really bad at this, especially when like Elon was pumping it, and Elon kept making this point, apparently failing to realize that like these specific fees that are being paid right now are not some like thing that's going to necessarily stay at that level, right? They represent the current demand for the block space. And every time we change these various parameters and change features of the protocol, you're making certain trade-offs, right? You increase the block space, you're going to decrease the number of individuals who can run a node that validates the entire history, right? And like you change the requirements for every other thing. And so I worry sometimes that there are those who try to convince themselves that Ethereum has some type of immaculate conception in the same sense that Bitcoin does, and almost favor like inherit some of those Bitcoin brainworms surrounding that, and in doing so kind of forget that in each and every decision you're making about the protocol, you're managing trade-offs around throughput, around decentralization, around who is able to participate in staking and validation, and in how those rewards are distributed. And each of those decisions ends up having trade-offs, and there's space for disagreement on all of those different parameters.
Paul, we'll throw it to you for the last comment on anything said so far. But also, I just wanted to just focus on, if you could also, do you, because you're deep in the Ethereum world, or you have a good view across it, do you see even any things within the little segments of the Ethereum community that we don't want to, sort of rise up and sort of take over, if you like these toxic maxis or whatever they're called on the Bitcoin side have in recent years?
Yeah, I think I just on the ultrasound money meme, I really really dislike it, and at some point I will write about this as possibly the worst positioning you could come up with. I would say probably the more interesting thing about Ethereum is that it has a more like they're willing to actually manage their money in some kind of way. They're trying to mimic something about Bitcoin, but actually it's very likely that the monetary policy will change. And I think it's better just to be upfront than try to compete with the one thing Bitcoin definitely has, which is this very unbending, clear economic message. Whether you think it's true or not, for its believers it is the transition to hyper Bitcoinization, the monetary policy can't change, all that kind of thing. I think Ethereans are probably better off leaning into we're more like traditional, the way traditional money is going to be managed, and we should see that as possibly to our advantage. The flip side of that is maybe the potential for over-engineering. So if you look at the Ethereum roadmap, so it's sort of like a 7-year roadmap going forward before the protocol will be considered ossified, and even then probably the culture will have shifted. There's the saying that Ethereum never delivers anything on time, but it always delivers. So I would say it's probably going to be 10 years before really Ethereum settles. And if you look at that roadmap, which it's the one with the verge and the splurge, and it has all these different phases. There's all kinds of tinkering that's going on in the protocol, and I think there's always a danger there that something unintentional could happen. I think that's one of the main dangers in Ethereum, that the Ethereum community doesn't really discuss that much, probably because they would see it as admitting some weakness. And the Bitcoiners might jump in on it. And that is actually something that happens quite a bit. Every time I do see Ethereans trying to publicly discuss something like, Lido, and whether Lido's stake is too large, then they basically get the Cyber Hornets turn up, and then the discussion just becomes the Cyber Hornets versus the Ethereum version. So I don't know, we don't really have a name for the Ethereum maximalist yet. Somebody really needs to kind of come up with it. But you do see it. You see the same 5 or 10, like maybe there's like 10 hardcore people who seem to basically exist only to defend Ethereum from Bitcoiners 24/7. That's their job. They're always there. Ethereum is never wrong. They will never listen to what the Bitcoiners are saying. The Bitcoiners are often, spewing this nonsense at them, but
Are they
sometimes
influential?
they're yeah, they're. I wouldn't say they're influential. I think if you're hanging around Ethereum a lot and if you're in the worst place that you can be, which is where I am, in the middle of Bitcoin and Ethereum. So that's the place that I
You're getting it from all
inhabit.
sides.
Yes, I'm seeing when they're fighting each other because I follow both communities, so I see when they tangle. Whereas what I do notice is that most people who are in Ethereum in a more straightforward way don't really know about these maximalists. So they're not dominant yet. They're still a little bit to the side. You see sometimes strands of it in, say, like Bankless and the Daily Gwei, where they do have that sense of, like Ethereum is almost inevitably going to win. It would be a deeply ironic situation if that happened. And I just want to throw in one thing on this, which is the competing between them, fundamentally, I think is a little bit silly. So the reason why we even have this discussion, like Bitcoin versus Ethereum, as if it's a battle, it all goes back to market capitalization. Like what's victory really mean? It means that, Ethereum
Right.
flips Bitcoin on CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap, two websites that like completely made up a market capitalization ranking system. And what happens? Okay, you flip Bitcoin, and how will you feel? Will everything suddenly be perfect with Ethereum, or will all your problems suddenly disappear? It's not going to happen. I advocate for the divorce. So this is my position is that Bitcoin and crypto should divorce. If the Bitcoiners want to leave, they should get their own website called Bitcoin Market Cap, and it's just like one entry, it's Bitcoin, and then like everything else, and then Ethereum will go number one. So it solves everybody's problems.
I like that. Pooty, what do you think? I'm feeling a lot more optimistic from this topic than I was after the guys mentioned what their thoughts are on Luna and FTX. What do you think?
Yeah, there is hope. I mean, at the end of the day, people just like to argue in this world. So, things will just turn out how they are. And all the people that wasted their breath arguing about how great Ethereum was, or how changing to proof of stake was going to kill Ethereum, all of this stuff, it just all disappears. It all disappears because when the dust settles, Bitcoin's going to be where Bitcoin is, and Ethereum's going to be where Ethereum is. And then there's just a bunch of wasted argumentative energy in between.
Yeah, and it's just like, again, what I mentioned earlier, it just seems like unnecessarily, part of the culture wars now, and sort of everyone is left, right, they're arguing over this, that, and it's become so global, Northy, or even American in that regard. You take a look at anywhere else in the world, they're just cracking on, and they don't really think about it in these terms. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Worldcoin, Sam Altman, AI. Pudding, what do you think? Maybe you want to start this one off. What's your thoughts on this? What do you make of this Sam Altman guy? I know you've mentioned he's a bit of a character before. Do you see, like, WorldCoin seems to be like, the whole idea is what to scan our retinas to make sure we're human, and what AI seems to be wanting to replace you. Like, what is going on here? What do you see? It's like, yeah.
Well, I kind of get a kick out of like Altman creating the AI, and so now all of these jobs can be replaced by AI, and then playing the exact, we could literally call it the other side of the world coin. So that he's made it's like a perfect circle business. So then so he's doing the chat GPT on one side and the AI on one side, and then the other side he's just like, how do we possibly tell if you're a real human? Oh, here, WorldCoin solves it. Scan your retinas here. We'll know you're not a robot. But why do we even need it? Because of your first invention. I don't know. I just kind of get the snake eating its own tail vibe of Sam Altman's business model, I guess.
Bennett, snake eating its own tail, Worldcoin. What's going on with this? Like, peel it back, and there's Sam Altman. Like, what do you make of the whole thing?
I mean, clearly he's just obsessed with Sybil attacks, and he just really wants to deal with Sybil attacks in the worst possible way. Sam Altman, in general, is a doomsday fetishist who owns like an armed bunker in New Zealand and is invested in like at least one, but I think multiple cryogenics companies, including, again, at least one, which would require him to be euthanized for their technology to work. Like, this is a guy who thinks the end of days is coming and spends a lot of time thinking about it and planning for how he specifically is going to survive.
You've just put a whole new spin on dark Roundtable with that, Bennett. Oh my God, that is very dark.
And so, like, I understand what he's trying to do with Worldcoin. If we have this single ID that is based on an unchangeable part of your body, then we're going to know that this ID corresponds to an actual human being. But like, it seems like it misses all of the points, right? Like, having something that ties you as an individual to this entire set of transactions is probably a bad thing. And it does mean that you need to find actual people in order to perform your Sybil attack. But like, in a certain sense, that only kind of matters, right? Like, if you're sufficiently wealthy and sufficiently powerful, you can offer things of enough value to participate, to convince like other actual people to do whatever you need them to do, right? And like, broadly, I think that it just doesn't seem to solve any particularly interesting questions to me. Then more strikingly, like, they are way behind their own stated timelines. As of like the end of 2022 or something, they said they were going to be producing 1 million orbs a year or something like that, and they're nowhere close to that. They're supposed to be doing like 1 million signups a day and are nowhere close to that. Like, they haven't even stayed close to like their own promised rollout. And even their World ID product no longer requires you to verify with their orbs. You can set up your World ID with your phone number, which again is missing the entire point. Like, if you're going to make your entire thing about the goddamn dystopian orb, you have to use the goddamn dystopian orb.
What? I didn't know that. That's crazy. Paul, what do you make of all this? Like, how far back does this go? And is this, encroaching totalitarianism here? Like, what's going on?
Worldcoin I just find almost darkly funny, just in the sense of, there's some things that people like. There's some ideas that people have, probably when they're drunk or something, and you just like, everybody else should just say to you like, that's a really bad idea and we should never do it. Worldcoin is one of those concepts, right? Like, even like, and I mean, even the orb itself, just as a visual, that nobody at any point in the design process said we should probably try to come up with something less ominous than staring into an orb. It's almost like that idea of, people used to think the camera stole your soul. Like, I feel like that has that same energy. It's like you're looking into this machine, and the tech dystopia is basically going to suck you in. So, I mean, the Worldcoin itself is an interesting project in that there isn't a deep history about how the company was formed. I've looked into it, and you find scattered bits and pieces of information. It's mostly media. You can't find much of what I would consider organic community, which would be more common in crypto, where you might see bits and pieces of scandals and tidbits that you could then dive into deeper topics. Everything is very, very corporate and safe, and there's not much revealed. Everything is also mediated by the website very, very heavily. They don't really tend to say anything out of school. So I'm not necessarily opposed to the in as much as it's something that exists and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm not necessarily opposed to the use of zero knowledge proofs. I think that's kind of okay. It seems like they've got some young developers, well-known developers in crypto with some history of producing good crypto stuff. So all that I'm not too sure about. The problem with it is this is sometimes called ZK washing, where the explanations that you get of why the orb is safe is one of those things where you don't really, like, most of us are never going to really be able to know if that's true or not. It's so complicated. So if you critique Worldcoin on Twitter, and then you get some Worldcoin people talking to you, and they will turn up, and including people who work there. For some reason, I'm blocked by Alex, the CEO. I don't remember ever interacting with him, but I must have said something terrible. So the explanations they give are, go to the website, we've updated everything away from the old model, and now everything is zero knowledge proof, which is the hot trendy topic in crypto, and often for good reason. But in this case, it feels more like, because of the implications, it feels like that you just go to the website and you're just bamboozled by promises that zero knowledge proof equals privacy. So I do worry about that aspect to it. But really, what I would be concerned with in this case is the venture capital firms, the savvy legitimation tactics. So one of the things you can see happening right now is Worldcoin clearly is much better organized than the normal crypto company or project. So they're immediately integrated into Lens. They're doing partnerships with ENS, and they have partnerships with Optimism, right? So they're going to be widely connected to some of the big power hubs in Ethereum. So they're making themselves almost like indispensable and legitimate in like Ethereum culture terms, right? So they're associated with all the projects that you would consider, mostly good public goods. Not necessarily they're long projects. They haven't rugged anybody. So that worries me, because I think that means that it will be, if there is any kind of misbehavior, it'll be kind of hard to extricate Worldcoin if it does become this very global thing. Sometimes it feels a little bit SBF to me. There's that sense of legitimation, but now it's in crypto language. So taking the authentic language of crypto and legitimizing yourself and integrating yourself with the power players does seem to be something that I feel like I'm watching in slow motion. The other big one is the allocations of the tokens, right? So this is not always an issue, but the 80% of the tokens are distributed to, all the people who will be Worldcoined one day for their contribution to Iris biometrics. And then the rest is, there's a 10% for the treasury, and then there's 10% for the investors. And that sort of 10% and what they expect and what their demands are the kind of things that would make me worry. So let's say, would they want to monetize the data in some kind of way? So on the website, it basically says that there's aggregated data. So they're a little bit ambiguous about it, but the aggregated data is going to be used for training. Presumably, the implication is the training is to improve the orb. But given that there's it seems possible to me that data could also be used for other things, especially for OpenAI. So that would be a concern for me. Who's that data for? And with these kind of companies, you can get the promises, but will they, of course, actually behave how we want? And then contingency plans in terms of hacks, leaks, corruption, black markets. We've seen the black markets like in China already. People basically gaming the system and paying people off. We've seen corruption. With their first run, when they were really signing people up, was very like lots of reports of corruption, and just it's the danger element of it is what would worry me. It feels like something where the negative things that could happen in terms of leaks, or we thought that the zero knowledge proof actually wasn't associated with the identities, but actually it turns out they were all along. Like that's something that could happen. Like it's not like a sort of perfect science where we know for sure Worldcoin biometrics are absolutely secure. So like all those fears to me signal turn back. But it's like his other project, right? It's like the way people talk about artificial intelligence. He sort of released it into the world, and then we're all supposed to have the discussion about it retroactively.
Which kind of brings us back to the snake circling that Sam Altman needed a no man. Just no, no Worldcoin.
Yeah, just something to say. Well, that brings it's kind of what I was thinking as well. Like Paul, I mean, I don't like to make sweeping generalizations, but the Ethereum community seems to me, at least, to be a community that might all of these things that you just said out would be at the forefront of their minds, because let's just say the Ethereum community that I like to think about is at least socially conscious and worried about all the sort of dark thing. So like what I'm trying to say is like, is there folks that you can see in the Ethereum community that are as worried and in the same reasons as what you just laid out? They're turning a blind eye. They see it a completely different way. What I mean, there's just none of that.
Yeah,
What's your take? Are they just open the floodgates? Or what? They have no control over Sam Altman and WorldCoin. They're too big. You can't hold them back. What's going on?
So like there's the so I guess like one of the things that kind of makes me a little bit sad is the way, let's say, the more established projects have like just done the partnerships and like just accepted like WorldCoin in a sort of uncritical way. So that would be like ENS, I think Optimism and Lens, just basically said like, okay, we're going to all work together.
But why? Why have they
and
done
then
that? What's the reason, do you think, why they've done that? And is that usual? Have they done that before? Because I guess they're the first line of defense. Once their big projects let it in, what else can anyone do? So what's the reason?
I think it's similar to what happened with SBF. I think it's similar, like it's not like a normal crypto company. It's a company that knows how to make connections, how to get things done fast. They I presumably also are have the money to make things happen. I'm sure they have people going around to different conferences and like basically doing an SBF and like giving their talks and allaying fears and making those connections and then getting partnerships like done so that like legitimation is hard to push out of the system. So I do think that that's going on. There is a contingent of people who are like just tech. There's a part of Ethereum culture which is just people who like technology and they just think it's cool and it's like Sybil resistance will be solved by this. So there is that type of person. But then there's also definitely and going on at the moment over the last say week or so is like ETH Prague, and before this they had like Web3 privacy. So this is the lunar punks and the solar punk people who are the more politically minded. So that lunar punk DAO guy that you were talking to before, and then like people like DarkFi, like they represent basically the emerging counter to the to WorldCoin. So they just look at WorldCoin. It's like, okay, we need to return back. So like Lunarpunk essentially being cypherpunk, but like for 2023. Just basically going back to the roots and saying, we can see that from their perspective, they would say the Ethereum blockchain is being gentrified, it's being commercialized. It's being like it's too transparent, and so we're gonna expose that as a problem. So there's definitely pushback, and the talks that I could see, I was just kind of watching the people who were at the event. One of the talks just had like a giant orb as his like introduction to the talk. So clearly, WorldCoin is seen as they see themselves as marshalling against WorldCoin as probably the symbol of this trend.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're at a point where we're about to start wrapping up, and something that we have kind of brought up and talked about multiple times here, and we came very close earlier to talking about it, which is in general consequences for bad actors. We have the potential that WorldCoin here might become a future bad actor that will be very difficult to even spot the truth of because of their corporate reality. But in general, what Alex and I have like found as we're poking into these various areas is that very few consequences ever happen. You get a couple of things where somebody gets caught and there's a little bit of somebody is taken to court, some money, somebody maybe served a little bit of jail time. But overall in the crypto space, I'm curious, maybe we'll start with Bennett. I'm just sort of curious as to what you think or see as needed for a less scam friendly environment. Like, why is nobody getting caught? There's so many scams, so all over the place, from small to big. Why is nobody paying any consequences?
And just before you answer, Bennett, like we touched on this kind of before with part one with Logan, Paul, and influencers. The criminal justice system will come round, and why is there no reputational damage? We didn't really talk about bigger projects, I suppose, as to differentiate from that discussion on influencers, and maybe as an adjunct to or an add-on to Pudding's question, just further to that, what can the community at large do away from the criminal justice system? We've talked about this at length in our episodes. Is there anything in a decentralized way that we can do to stop scammers, influencers, these kind of darker projects from proliferating? Like if Paul and you are right, and this is the darkness around Worldcoin as one example, and we can see it, and we see the risks, and we want to take a more sort of, hold on, let's not rush into anything. Isn't there anything in a decentralized way that we can do to put some pressure on Arbitrum or Optimism or anyone else just to go, hey. It just feels like we're all a bit sort of, what do we do? There's nothing that can be done. Oh, let's just wait on the state to grab these influencers, or let's wait on FTX to crash. Yeah, anyway, sorry for adding on so much to your question, Pudding, but yeah, Bennett, let's bounce to you.
Yeah, so I think there are sometimes consequences, like we talked about in part one of this conversation. There are people paying fines, there are people going to prison and stuff for crimes they committed in the cryptocurrency space. Broadly, societally, especially in the United States, I think there is a tendency to not see white-collar crime seriously and to kind of have a tacit acceptance of a certain amount of corruption. And I think fixing that kind of thing requires confronting broader societal and cultural issues, even beyond cryptocurrency. One of the most interesting cases to me in crypto would be Sifu, Michael Petrin, Omar Dahani. Those are all the same person, for anyone listening who doesn't know. He started out in the pyramid scheme forums, right? In the high yield income programs like Talk Gold, back when he was first starting out, running and participating in Ponzi schemes. He joins a cryptocurrency exchange, and according to analysis from people like Tevano, took funds from Quadriga and used them to gamble with leverage on BitMEX. Pops back up in Wonderland and immediately seems to have some amount of community support. ZachXBT points out Sifu's history, and there is clearly some amount of reputational damage. Sifu has to appear to separate from Wonderland in that brief interval. But as soon as Sifu tweets out the pool or whatever for Sifu Vision when he's launching it, there's enough idiots who are willing to still participate. And so this is kind of part of the problem I think that we're really dealing with here, is someone like Omar has potentially, anyone around the world can potentially throw their hard-earned money away by giving it to Sifu. And he only needs to find enough people who are willing to do that, right? And there's certain cultural elements in cryptocurrency that make this easier. Broadly, especially among the more degenerate portions of cryptocurrency, there's an acceptance of Ponzi scheme, an embrace of unsustainable elements, and many people explicitly are going into projects, protocols, and whatever, not because they think they are unique or good or valuable, but because they think there's going to be a window for them to extract value. And so the more common that type of view becomes, the more accepted it is, the easier it is for someone like Sifu to convince a bunch of people this is basically the same as those things. You giving me that money for a token that does nothing is basically the same as you dumping your money into the newest pool to yield farm in the hope that you're able to dump enough of that token to make a profit. And so broadly, what I think less airtime and consideration needs to be given to projects, protocols, and people that are not actually trying to achieve anything. Less interest needs to be given people who have thoughts on what the charts for the latest meme coin are saying are not valuable members, really, of the cryptocurrency movement, if you want. And so, like, if you want to make it less common for people to find marks in this space, you need to spend less time giving platforms to scammers.
Interesting. Yeah. Paul, what do you think? Anything to add? How would you deal with this?
Yeah, I think so. The question, it comes back to a long-standing question in decentralized cultures and even anarchist cultures and libertarian cultures that how do you police in the absence of police? So if you're in some way the high ideal of these cultures, maybe not anymore, but at least in theory and in the beginning, is that you're trying to, like, decentralization in a way is like partially trying to make a self-organizing or self-policing community. And because there is a little bit of an anti-statist adversarial element within crypto and always has been, that means that there's a almost like there's a weird double dance. Like, in one sense, it's like they you hate they like don't like police, don't like investigations because they might ruin the fun. But also, they're the people who come in at the end and arrest people. And yeah, just to add that people, like, a good example recently is Reggie Fowler, who got sentenced, who would have been like a big crypto money launderer, who's kind of pretty old by crypto standards, and they caught up with him eventually. So this question of self-policing is one I like to kind of bring up. So it's not the case that if you have a community which doesn't really want too much policing or too much regulation, doesn't have any kind of culture or rules or limits on behavior, that's something that needs to be emphasized. That's something that needs to be brought in, that there is supposed to be some kind of sense of where the lines are. And it's not like those lines are going to get you sent to jail or anything like that, but they are lines where if you cross them, you are in some way seen as a little bit of a pariah or an exile. And crypto has in some way got into this foolishly got into this meta way of looking at it, where it's a wink and a nod, where Sifu comes back after being involved in Quadriga, and now he's involved in DeFi, and it's like, well, he's just like a chancer, he's just like somebody who's on the make, and it's not really that big of a deal. But it has to be going forward. It has to be something that's made clear, and the way that you do that is actually. It's sort of slow work, unfortunately. It involves getting involved in whatever capacity you can, whether that means conferences or events or writing, or whether you're in your Twitter engagement of bringing those topics to the fore, even though they might be a little bit unpopular, and seeing yourself as somebody who can shape and change the culture. So a good example of this would be the Lunar Punks, right? The Lunar Punks are a group of people who have decided collectively to start giving talks and, writing articles in CoinDesk, and doing all these different things. And what are they doing? They're shaping the culture, and they're shaping expectations of what they believe the limits of something like Worldcoin should be in the crypto ecosystem. So it can be done, but it involves organizing. Another example would be Udi and Eric Wall, where they basically changed Bitcoin culture through long-term advocacy and reimagined or pushed back against what was considered acceptable behavior by the Bitcoin maximalists, all that kind of thing. And the other side is, and of course, it may never work. It may be the case that your community is always going to have a little bit of chaos and a little bit of crime. But I guess, like any society, your optimal job is just to make it so that there's more interesting, pleasant, and good projects that are valuable to people without causing harm to other people. And that's a bit of a forgotten libertarian principle, of non-violence, which can also be said as like non-harm. And I think it would be nice to bring that model back, that you're not like supposed to be you're not supposed to be like ironically engaging in scams and hustles, which is something that's become a little bit more normalized. And then, of course, Zach XBT would be the trailblazer here. I think he's just the beginning of what will eventually become, self-organizing detectives. People who are highlighting like bad behavior, and maybe he can't get rid of Sifu for forever, and there's always going to be people who fall for it. But by shining a light on him, and shining a light on people, and giving them the feeling that they might be socially exposed. And then potentially criminally, but let's just say in the social part, that there are people out there who are enforcing in air sense, on air terms, the social contract of crypto.
I think that's yeah. Go ahead, Pudding.
So I mean, just to kind of like round this all up, what I'm hearing. So basically, if I kind of take both of your concepts, is broadly, try to not give focus to the shit scam projects, right? Try to deplatform, less platform attention, try to highlight the positive, and inform the masses so there's more education around it, and then all that while keeping it so that it's fun and interesting, so that you're and oh, I'm sorry, the third part or the fourth part being like a little army of personalized private detectives that are shining light into these dark places.
Yeah, I think, and that kind of, we've kind of explored some of those options every time we speak to either a guest, or if we discuss this between ourselves, which we tend to do on a regular basis. A lot of those education, deplatforming, little army of global detectives in their little spaces teaming up in a decentralized way. I find myself just completely resonating with all of that. And then what Paul said there about the sort of old libertarian principle of, do no harm unto others. That's so true. Do you know what I mean? Like, you should be getting on your way in the crypto world without wanting to do harm to others. And it's not, leave me alone to do harm. Like, yeah, get your hands off me, I'm allowed to do harm. Like, that's not a thing. So people need to get rid of that. I find myself really conflicted. There's a part of me that really wants to, find these. I think you'd agree, Pudding, from what we've discussed before. There's a part of us that wants to find these scammers, and because of the harm they've done to the little dude or whoever, like, I don't know. We can't bang them up, as the old saying goes. But can we sanction them? Can the crypto community forbid them from some certain spaces for a certain while? Is that again
social leprosy? A little social leprosy.
Yeah. Maybe, or maybe, I don't know, some sort of way where they're penalised. Is that again against the libertarian principle? We shouldn't get into that. We should just do all of the other things. It's all, education and all the other things you've talked about. I don't know. It seems like a really difficult thing, but interesting discussion. Maybe we'll have to come back and dive into that one further. Let's wrap it up there, I think. Guys, been an absolute pleasure to talk to you both across both these parts, and again, just very intellectually satisfying, and hopefully a lot of lessons for folks listening from whatever seat they're sitting in.
Thanks so much, Bennett and Paul, for joining us. It's just so nice to have top information in this discussion together. So it was really like a great moment to have you guys both on here, and really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us.
Yeah, it was really informative. Guys, maybe you just want to again leave your Twitter handles for folks listening. They probably are like, what a fascinating discussion. Just remind us of your Twitter handles again so we can go and follow you. So yeah, let's maybe end on that. And I think, can't wait to have you guys back for another dark roundtable. I love that name, because this has been fascinating. Bennett, if you want to leave your Twitter handle or the best place for folks to find you, we'll end on that. And then Paul.
Sure. I'm at Bennett Tomlin on Twitter, and you can find my podcast, Crypto Critics Corner, wherever you get podcasts, and on YouTube.
Give it a listen. And Paul?
I'm at Polarpunklabs on Twitter, and if you want to look up my formal, boring academic work, it's Paul Dylan.
We advocate do that too. if you don't like just the small takes on Twitter, go and search out the research work, the university work. All right, guys. Well, pleasure again, and thanks very much for joining us. And Pudding, we'll catch you in the next one, buddy. Thanks,
All
guys.
right. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks.